a social institution like a university, and then you look at the organization of that university at every single strata, from the executive level all the way down to the student level. Then what you do is you do an analysis of each level by community demography, right? You get to define the demographic characteristics that you're going to discuss, however, which is actually a big problem. Then you make the presupposition that unless that organization at every level matches the demographic representation of people at every level, then it's corrupt, oppressive, and discriminatory, and it needs to be changed. Okay, so you think, well, what's wrong with that? Every level should have 50-50 men and women, let's say. It's like, you're really sure about that, are you? You're so sure about that. You don't think there's any natural differences in interest between men and women? Well, if you don't think so, then why are most psychology classes 80% women? And that differentiation is accelerating rapidly, like I've seen it over the course of my career, from maybe 60% men at the beginning of my career to like 80% women now. And men occupy more of the positions in the STEM fields, at least for now. It's the same in bloody Scandinavia. It's 20-to-1 nurses, 20-to-1 women to men nurses in Scandinavia, and 20-to-1 men to women in engineering. And that's in Scandinavia. And so what's happened in Scandinavia, as they've made the society more egalitarian in terms of its legal and social structures, is that the gender differences in personality between men and women have got bigger, not smaller. So what that means is that social constructionism is wrong. That's what it means. Wrong. Disproved. It's exactly the opposite of what the theory would have predicted, because the theory predicted, and God only knew how it was going to sort itself out. It's not like people knew this to begin with. The idea was that as you equalized the social structure, that the differences between men and women would disappear. Guess what? That didn't happen. And it's not studies of just a few hundred people in a few locations. Those are population-wide studies, and they've been replicated multiple times. So, first of all, to make gender equity across every dimension of an organization, you have to assume that men and women have identical interests and temperaments, and that if they don't, the state should intervene to bloody well ensure that they do, which is something for all you women to figure out, because now there's many positions in society that women preferentially occupy. So what are you going to do about that? And what are you going to do about the Asians? Because they occupy preferential positions as well. You know, they're overrepresented in all sorts of professional institutions. And the probability is that that's going to increase. What are you going to do about that? What about the Jews? What are you going to do about them? Because they're in the same position as the Asians. You're going to put quotas on all those people? What kind of stupidity is that? HR and equity people, they're actually mucking about with people's unconscious biases. So this is what we want, right? We want your employers and the state to re-educate you so that your perceptions, because that's what we're talking about with regards to unconscious bias, so that your perceptions fall into accordance with their demands. And not even your voluntary perceptions. By the way, your involuntary, unconscious perceptions have to be retrained. Okay, so maybe that's not so good, especially when you look at that bloody implicit association test. Mahzarin Banaji from Harvard and Anthony Greenwald from the University of Washington. So Banaji is an avowed Marxist, and Greenwald and Banaji both bloody well know and have written that their implicit association test has neither the reliability nor the validity to be used as an individual diagnostic test. They know social psychology has been rife with controversy and scandal over the last 3 or 4 years. And a big part of the reason for that is it's damn corrupt discipline. And the use of the IAT for political reasons is a perfect example of that. There is no excuse for it. And the people at St. Mike's, you know, they say, well, this is scientifically validated. It's like, no, it's not. And worse, let's say you do have unconscious bias, just for the sake of argument, and you could measure it reliably, which you can't, and then it was valid, which it isn't. Let's say all of those things were in case. There's no evidence whatsoever that those damn unconscious bias training programs, retraining programs, have the effect that they're supposed to have, and there's some evidence that they actually have the reverse effect. And maybe that's because people don't really like being marched off to re-education by their employers after they've been diagnosed as racist, even if there's no evidence that they in fact are. So it's an absolute misuse of psychology, and it's politically motivated. It's politically motivated. It's an assault on freedom. Anyways, I made those 2 videos, and I tried to take the HR and equity people at the U of T to task because they made that training mandatory for their HR people. I thought, you don't have the right as an employer to invade the unconscious structures of your employees' minds and alter their political perspective, even though you can't do it. You don't have the right to do that, and to think about it as something you should do as a matter of course, as part of your ethical duty is... You really want that? You really want that? That's what you want your employers to be able to do? Figure out, independently of your behavior, whether or not you're a racist, or a classist, or a misogynist, or whatever that happens to be. And you really think that the bureaucrats at the university, for example, or bureaucrats anywhere for that matter, are actually capable and qualified of doing such a thing properly, without doing far more damage than any possible. Get 100 letters a day, at least. I can't keep up with them. From people who are being cornered in all sorts of ways by their idiot employers and these safe space propositions at universities and the restrictions on their speech. They tell me constantly, well, I really agree with you, but I'm afraid to say anything about it. It's like, oh good, that's a wonderful position for us to be in, where people are afraid, they're afraid to speak their minds. What the hell? And it's not getting better. And if we don't do something about it, it's going to get a lot worse. You saw what happened at Berkeley. That's just a taste of what's to come. You know, one day there's going to be an anti-FAS demonstration with a little bit of violence, and the bad guys on the other side are going to come out. And we're not going to like that very much. So maybe we should get our acts together and stop that from happening before it actually happens, unless that's what you want, and I wouldn't recommend it. We have a pretty sophisticated society, and it wouldn't take much to put a spanner into the spokes and flip everybody on their forehead. So, wake up, for Christ's sake. This is not good. And the fact that you know, the bloody federal government has decided that they won't let people pick the judiciary anymore unless they take unconscious bias retraining. Right? What the hell? It's crazy. And you'll hear the neo-Marxist types. This is the most annoying argument anyone ever makes. They say, well, what happened in the Soviet Union? That wasn't real communism. It's like, first, oh yes, it was. That's why it also happened in China, which was a very different society. But what they really mean when they say that is, well, you know, that's Stalin character. He wasn't such a good guy. He didn't really know how to implement the Marxist doctrines. But me, I'm pretty pure of heart. And if you would have made me dictator for 20 years, then the utopia would have arrived as promised. It's like, first of all, if you think that, there's something wrong with you. You're dangerous. And second, let's just say for a minute that some saint did get a hold of the tools of power and try to implement from each according to his ability, to each according to his need, and actually did that in a pure and saint-like manner. Here's what would happen. The next people in the revolutionary string, like Stalin, would come along and stab them in their bed in the middle of the night, and that would be the end of that. So there's absolutely no excuse whatsoever for that sort of thinking. And if you read Solzhenitsyn's Gulag Archipelago, which you should do, like everyone should, because it's like the definitive document of this sort of thing that emerged from the 20th century, Solzhenitsyn laid out with extraordinary clarity, first in his writings on Lenin and then in his writings on the Soviet Union more broadly, exactly how the pernicious and pathological Marxist doctrines were transformed logically and systematically into the sorts of laws that killed millions of people. Millions of people. There were people starving so badly in the Soviet Union by the 1920s that they had posters telling them not to eat their children. So we've been down that road already. So what the hell are we doing? We're going down that road again under the guise of equity, right? And equality. Well, that was the doctrines that promoted those laws to begin with. Not good.
Do you have a theory with regards to how we do expand equality without going to such extremes?
I think we're doing a good job of that right now. I mean, how fast do you think how fast could you even hope for things to change? Look at what's happened to the situation with women since 1970. That's changed so fast that people can't even keep up. It's not obvious, by the way, either, that it's been particularly good for women. Now, you could make a case that it was good for society, maybe. It's a tough one, eh? Because the birth rate is plummeted. And so, maybe you don't care about that. Maybe you think there's too many people on the planet already, whatever. But, it isn't that easy to figure out when something is working properly. One of the things we seem to know, is that to the degree that rights are extended to women, economic prosperity follows. So you can see worldwide that the societies that have extended the rights to women most extensively are also the societies that seem to be flourishing economically. And there does seem to be a causal relationship. But women have paid a big price for that. So what's happened in part is, first of all, for say, women who are middle class or lower, their lives have essentially fallen apart because marriage is now restricted to the rich, which is also something to think about for those of you who think marriage is an oppressive patriarchal institution. It's like, okay, then why are only the rich people getting married? They're oppressing themselves? I don't think so. And so the women who are in the lower socioeconomic stratas are suffering madly, and so are their children. And they have terrible jobs most of the time, like jobs in retail where, they're called in every day for the next day. They don't have a schedule that's set out ahead of them. They get paid very badly. They've got kids to take care of. And so they have no free time. And the data on this is very clear. What's the relationship between money and well-being? Once you have enough money to keep the bill collectors from your door, so once you have enough money to stave off misery, which is sort of lower middle class, something like that in our society, maybe a little lower than that, extra money does not help you. It does not improve your life. So why bother with it? Well, that's what the women in the law firms think. It's like most of them, by the time they're in their 30s, are married. Almost all of them are married to men who make as much money or more than they do, because that's what women go for cross-culturally. 4 to 5 years older, equal or higher in the socioeconomic status. So their husbands already make $350,000 a year. It's like they think, well, I don't need much more money. The men use money to keep track of the competition, by the way, because all the male lawyers that I talk to are usually real hard-ass guys, really low in agreeableness, really high in conscientiousness, like conservative types, low in openness as well. And they want to win. And the reason they care about their damn bonus at the end of the year isn't even so much because of the money, it's because they got a much bigger bonus than the other son of a bitch sitting beside them, and they're happy about that. So there's a real brass knuckles competition that drives these sorts of things. Productivity is not normally distributed. You learn in psychology that everything is normally distributed. It's like, no, it's not. Random things are normally distributed, but productivity isn't random. And so what you see, productivity is actually governed by something called Price's Law, which is a variation of another principle called the Pareto Principle, which was discovered back in the late 1800s by Vilfredo Pareto, who was an economist. What Price showed, Price actually studied scientific productivity, and so what he showed, it's quite cool. At the time when he did this was in 1960, the typical PhD student had 1 publication on graduation. Okay, half as many had 2. Half as many as that had 3. Half as many as that had 4. Massive step down in productivity. And you see this in scientific productivity, period. So what happens is that in any given scientific domain, there's a clump of people sort of on the left side of the distribution, the less productive side, and in that clump, men and women are equally productive. But then there's a tiny percentage of people who publish like all the papers, and they're all men. And there are those insane men that I was telling you about before that do nothing but work for 80 hours a week. And the thing is, if you want to rise to the top of a profession, you think about it. What do you need to rise to the top of a competitive profession? You better be smart. Because smart makes you fast. And you're not going to get to the next place faster than anyone else unless you're faster than them. You bloody well better be conscientious. Industrious in particular.
Publication, which is not to get your blood boiling.
Yeah.
Something somebody sent me. Glaciers, Gender, and Science, a feminist glaciology framework for global environmental change research.
Yeah.
Okay, you want to talk about productivity, and then there's academia. And not to denigrate all of academia, but unfortunately, this is the profession in which people, have killed trillions of trees for bullshit, basically. So I just thought that would be a nice, ironic twist.
Yeah, well, the postmodernists, they don't believe in... I don't know how much you know about postmodernist philosophy. You're at Ryerson, so probably quite a bit. But not that the U of T is any better, because it's not. But the postmodernists don't believe in science. there's lots of things they don't believe in. They don't believe in logic. And I'm not making this stuff up. Like, you can go read it for yourself, Derrida in particular. They think that logic is part of the oppressive patriarchy and that there's no point in dialogue because all there is different power groups identified by their groups and they can't really talk. It's just a power struggle. And that's why the radical leftists stop people from speaking on campus. Postmodern neo-Marxist sleight of hand. You know, Marxism got demolished in the 70s. Demolished, ruined. It was never to rise again. The postmodernists, sneaky French intellectuals, played a little sleight of hand. Okay, it's not the working class against the wealthy. It's the victims against the oppressors. Great. All we did was move the goalpost slightly. Now we get to play the same game. Yeah, well, it's a lot easier than thinking. So, yeah.
And because we've had so many people who've escaped communism, why do you
That's
think
what they thought.
Well, exactly. So why do you think those stories aren't getting out? Because
God, that's a good question. I teach about the Gulag Archipelago in my personality class of all the dopey places to teach it. It's like at the beginning of the class, I say, well, how many of you know that 30 million Soviet citizens were destroyed through internal repression between 1919 and 1959? It's like 4 people put up their hands. I say, well, how do you know? I watched your lectures on YouTube. You know, that's not taught in schools. Why? I know why. It's because the bloody intellectual leftists have never apologized for their complicity in the catastrophes of the 20th century. The Germans apologized. Sorry about the Nazis. Well, the left-wing intellectuals, they say, oh, well, that wasn't real Marxism. It's like, oh, okay. How many corpses have to pile up around you before you're willing to question your beloved ideological presuppositions and face your resentment and your narcissism and your desire for destruction? You don't like people anyways. The planet has too many of them. So like a nice war might clear that up well. Then all the plants can grow again. You know, the Club of Rome, when they talked about the population explosion that was going to wipe out the planet by the year 2000, they said outright that human beings were a cancer on the planet. Lots of people think that. It's like, oh boy, let's put the atom bomb phone in your hands. Human beings are a cancer on the planet. What a hell of a thing to say. You can say that to a 4-year-old? I saw a bloody professor at Queen's University tell a whole room full of 18-year-olds that if they had an ethical fiber in their body, they wouldn't have any kids. Or they'd only have one. Because all they're doing is going out there and raping the planet. It's like, what the hell?